I didn't know where to post this, but I guess this is as good a place as any. I've been a long-time lurker of the horror community, and finally decided to share one of my stories that I've tried to block out of my mind. I have posted pictures that I took during that day, and before you ask, no, I do not have the camera or the drive that the pictures were on. I tried looking through the metadata of the pictures and videos that I captured, but the time frame that we hiked and the timestamp on the images are way off. With that being said, I'm most certain that I have a picture that was taken right at the time of the event, but again, I don't know which one it is. Now on to the story. The following story took place on the 19th of July 2011. So a little background. Every summer since I was 7, I would go out to California to visit my dad. He would take me up and down the state, visiting all the cool places a kid wanted to go to. As I got older, he started to take me to the national parks, like Yellowstone, Redwoods, and Yosemite. During this year in particular, he wanted to go back to Yosemite and rent one of those tents you see in a village campsite. I was really excited, since the last time we were there, we stayed in a hotel that was nearly 2 hours outside of the park. He also mentioned we would hit the park's infamous mist trail that goes up Vernal Falls again, since, well, last time I had difficulty hiking up it because my feet were killing me. He even hinted that he wanted to go down the John Muir Trail that was on the top of the falls. Now, John Muir, for those of you that don't know, is a bit of a California legend. He sought out to preserve some of the wilderness lands in the United States. His most notable accomplishment was establishing Yosemite as a national park in 1890, but even after his death, the man had a hospital and a middle school named after him. The last bit of information that I want to point out is that here was during the year Yosemite set a record of its waterfalls being 3 times more powerful than ever before due to the amount of snow and rain it had received during the winter and springtime. I think it was even featured on the nightly news when Brian Williams was on there at the time. On the morning of the hike, both my dad and I awoke with excitement. The two of us had trained for this day, with me being on the cross-country team for my school and him working out at the gym. We were more than ready to take on such an amazing trail. We packed up our backpacks, put our hiking boots on, and drove my dad's SUV to the trailhead parking lot. When we got there, it was around 8:30 and the parking lot was already full. I guess there were a lot of people eager to see this once-in-a-lifetime moment. We had to park all the way over where Curry Village was. This will be important for later. After 1.5 miles, we had finally reached the trailhead. This first part of the mist trail is paved and it has some steep hill inclines, but nothing too extreme. After you reach the end of the paved trail, you go across a footbridge over the stream that's at the bottom of the falls. However, that little stream is a fully blown rapid river. Now keep in mind, the park at the time had a very limited amount of signs and guardrails around the water areas, so it wasn't uncommon to see people wander off the trail to be by the stream to sunbathe or dip their feet in. Kids would also want to go in and splash each other like they're at a water park. My dad and I were also guilty of going off the trails to take pictures and such. Some of the pictures that I provided for you guys shows just how easy it was to be by the water. As for the park rangers, some of them didn't really mind it at the time. In fact, it was kind of nice having people explore the park, just as long as they were cautious and used good judgment. I haven't been back to Yosemite since this event, so I don't know how strict they are now with this trail. I forgot to mention this earlier, but the trail isn't for everybody. Once you've passed the footbridge, it's all uphill, and you have to climb up some stone steps. Some of the steps had eroded or washed away over the years, which made it extra difficult to climb up certain areas, especially when it got to be really narrow. You also have to combat the mist from the falls and not lose your footing, otherwise you might fall over the edge and go into the water. After our short break, my dad and I started to head up Vernal Falls, and like I mentioned earlier, the mist from the falls was intense, but it was rewarding in a way. When we got to the top, it was almost noon and we were ready to tear open our lunches. But before we did that, we went over to the John Muir trailhead while taking some pictures along the way. The trail wasn't too long, but if we wanted to get back to the parking lot, we would have to take another trail, which took way longer than the mist trail. We came to the conclusion that we would think about it during lunch, since our hunger is now overwhelming. That's when my dad asked me if we should eat by the falls or find a quieter place. Till this day, I still don't know what made me blurt out that we should find a quieter spot, away from the falls and the other noisy tourists. My dad agreed, and we made our way up the river to the point that it became a small creek, and we sat down at a picnic area. There was no one in sight, and all that we could hear was the water flowing in the stream and the birds chirping. As we were finishing up, we saw a bunch of people coming from every direction, and they weren't walking or running, and it was as if they were in a rush to get somewhere, but didn't know where to go. We didn't think anything of it and decided to head over to the stream before we went back to the falls. Now, to get to the stream, you had to walk over a bunch of rocks that were fun to climb and jump over. We approached one such jump over a gap. My dad went first, making it look easy, while I, on the other hand, had to get a running start. As I made my way over the gap, I heard something hiss and sort of jump at my leg. Upon landing, I quickly turned around to see a coiled-up rattlesnake in the gap with its eyes fixated on me. Luckily, he didn't bite me, and I was a safe distance away from it if it had tried to do anything. I called out for my dad, who is like Indiana Jones when it comes to snakes. I pointed out the snake, and when he saw it, his face turned a pale white. I laughed as he backed away in fear, and as he did that, another hiker was making their way right for the gap. I immediately told him to go around it, and he had a confused expression on his face. Once he'd come around to our side, he had seen the rattlesnake. He took out his phone to take pictures and video of it. At this point, my dad had had enough of the snake and made his way to the stream, and I followed him, hoping that the guy wouldn't get bitten. The creek was pretty shallow, and it was hard to believe that it had turned into this roaring waterfall. I stayed at the edge of the creek to soak my bandana to cool it down, while my dad went in a little further and bent down to do the same. Then all of a sudden, this Middle Eastern guy came out of nowhere and started talking to my dad in frantic voice. He said something along the lines of, "Sir, you're not allowed to be in there. Please get out of the water." Like I mentioned earlier, it wasn't uncommon to see people by the water, especially near a small stream like this one. It was very odd though, because this guy wasn't a park ranger, nor was he dressed for hiking. My dad slowly got up and said to the guy, "We're just soaking our sweatbands before we head back down. Everything is fine." The man grew more concerned. "Sir, please, you need to get out of the water now. It's very dangerous. I just saw 3 people die right from where you're standing." Then the man turned to me and said, "Son, if you value your father's life, you have to get him out of there." I'm completely speechless at this point, and my dad is ignoring this man's pleas, but before either one of us could say or do anything, the man runs off trying to warn other tourists that we were getting too close to the water. After he was out of sight, my dad got out and we grabbed our backpacks and headed towards the falls. As we were walking, I asked my dad what the guy had meant when he said that he'd seen 3 people die just by standing in a small stream. He looked at me confused as well, but reassured me that maybe they fell and hurt themselves or something. That confused me even more though. The stream wasn't as powerful as the falls, so how could someone lose their footing and die? The thought didn't last long because I was then distracted by the crowd of people that were gathered around the area where I had spotted the rattlesnake. We went about trying to find a park ranger so that no one could get hurt, but for some odd reason there wasn't one in sight. We kept walking until we finally made it to the falls, and at that point we were exhausted from the hike up. We decided to start on our way back down the mist trail. When we got to the trailhead, there was a large crowd of people blocking the trail. Impatiently, we made our way through the group of confused hikers, and then that's when we saw the caution tape all along the trail itself. There must have been 15 park rangers scouting the area and telling hikers coming up the trail to turn back immediately. Someone asked one of the rangers why they were closing off the trail, and in the most calm and professional tone, the park ranger said, "Oh, everything is all right. There was a dead animal that was found on the trail, and the smell is really unbearable. We're trying to remove it, but for now the mist trail is closed until further notice. Everyone here will have to take the John Muir Trail to get back down." I immediately knew something was off. There was way too much caution tape for just one dead animal, and why were they taping off the edges that were near the falls? Also, the 2 park rangers that were on the trail weren't looking on the trail itself, they were looking down into the water. Then I heard static on one of their radios. All I could make out was something about missing hikers. The John Muir Trail turned out to be a pretty nice detour. That is, until we hit the Panorama Trail. It was caked with horse droppings, and the smell was as bad as you could imagine, and it went on for 10 miles. We caught up with some of the other hikers along the way, and they were speculating as to what had actually happened. One said that it was a bear that had died and the rangers had to get a dump truck to haul it away. Another said it was a moose or a deer. I swear it's pretty funny what people come up with in these types of situations, but all of them would be wrong. About 2 hours later, we all finally got to the bottom of the trail. My legs felt like jelly at this point, and we still needed to get to the parking lot. On our way there, we spotted a park ranger standing guard at the missed trailhead. Curiosity got the better of my dad, and he went over to the ranger and asked what had actually happened. The ranger, knowing that my dad wasn't buying the whole dead animal story, let out a sigh and with a hesitant expression on his face said, "There were these 3 hikers that were part of this church group. They all decided to go over the railings that were near the top of the falls to take some pictures. The first victim went into the water and eventually lost their footing and fell. It was only a matter of time for the current to take him down the waterfall. Then 2 more hikers of the group went in and tried to save him, but they also lost their footing and were overtaken by the current. It was at this point people who were witnessing this occur discouraged others from jumping in unless they wanted to have the same happen to them. If the drop didn't kill them instantly, then the rocks below would have torn them apart. The trail was closed shortly after in fear of one of their bodies being on it." I sat there mortified. If we had decided to eat our lunch there, we would have been one of the many dozens of people that witnessed this horrible event and be able to do nothing but stand there and watch as 3 people fell to their deaths. What the ranger said next still haunts me to this day. "Due to the falls and rapids being as powerful as they are now, we can't recover the bodies until it dies down in October or November." My heart sunk into my chest, thinking about the friends and family members of the victims and that it's going to be a while for there to be a recovery. We got into the car, our legs were aching from the 12-mile hike, and for the rest of the way back we were silent. I never brought it up to my dad again, and that was that. I still think about the Middle Eastern guy telling my dad to get out. I don't know what I would have done if my dad was one of those victims. This just goes to show you that no picture is worth risking your own life. There are articles of the event in the description if you would like to take a look. In one of the articles I have listed, there is a follow-up on the bodies being recovered. My heart goes out to the friends and families of the victims. May they rest in peace. During my school years, I was crazy in love with the girl sitting in front of me in class. Though we didn't talk much out of school and our conversations were strictly school-related, I got to know her better when we started college. I wanted to spend most of my time with her because she made me feel free and fulfilled, but I was quite depressed during that period of my life. She meant the world to me. We were so damn close to each other, and I thought I could care for her for the rest of my entire life. Teenage normal shit and drama, you can argue. Since we were so close, I discovered she was making out with a foreign student, a Romanian dude. I hated him and couldn't understand why she fell for this guy. She was always in a hurry when I tried to reach her, and she wasn't the girl I once knew. It pissed me off big time. They'd post pictures of themselves together online almost daily. The whole situation made me sick. Once she'd invited me to hang out with them. I felt so angry during the whole time I was with them, but I kept my composure in front of him. I couldn't sleep and was missing school, and it got worse and worse each day. I didn't do much with my time except think about her. After 4 months, I got a call from her, inviting me to a party. Once there, I was sitting in a quiet corner, when I noticed they were laughing about something. It felt like they were laughing at me, and I have to admit that was the only time I got mad at her too. I don't really care how you see it or what you think of me, but all I saw was this immigrant scum trying to ruin my life and take the girl I was in love with. All I could do was leave, hoping they wouldn't notice me, but unfortunately they did. She asked me if everything was all right. I nodded yes, and as my hand was reaching out for the door, the bastard put his hand on my shoulder and said in bad English, "Hey, in a few days it's my birthday. I'll be happy if you would come too." Like, what the fuck? Since when? He gave me his phone number and I tried to give him a smile. Then I left. The next day at college he was there, with her of course. I tagged along with them until she left to go home and I was alone with him. He started to talk to me while we were waiting for a bus, but I didn't pay any attention to what he was saying to me. I just wanted to go home. But as he was talking to me, my anger grew inside me. In the corner of my eye, I saw a van coming by. I looked around me and we were the only ones on the street. I remember that I didn't have a single thought in that moment, and I just pushed him over the sidewalk. He wouldn't have been run over by the van with my push alone, but he slipped and got himself caught under it. His head burst open on impact, and I could hear a loud crack from his skull and bones. I'm fucked now, I thought, but the driver just drove away. I couldn't believe it. The adrenaline was pumping in me hard. I got to look at him for a second, and he was still alive, grunting heavily. I got the hell out of there as fast as I could, then started to slow down and walk normally. I then saw people coming along the street. I was waiting fearfully at home, expecting the cops to come after me, but it never happened. I forced myself to go to school as normal for the next few days and just tried to avoid acting suspiciously. After 2 days, I saw her, and she came to me crying, telling me that his mother had called to say he had died in a car accident. She was devastated, but I took her in my arms and held her as tightly as I could, relieved. From that moment onward, she and I got really close, and I just love her without any reservation or fear. Ironically now, as I think about it, it was the bastard's birthday that exact day that she told me the news. 12 years have passed since then, and we are still together and happily engaged. This happened to me about 4 years ago. It was 20 degrees Fahrenheit at the time and was during a tattoo convention in Toronto. I was still an apprentice tattoo artist then, and this was my first time working at a convention, so I was really excited, but also a bit underprepared. There were 6 of us going from the studio I worked in, 3 guys and us 3 girls. We booked separate hotel rooms. The guys booked theirs early, whereas I booked the room for the girls last minute, because I didn't realise then that the rooms would all be booked up near the convention centre. Needless to say, there was almost no affordable rooms left, and I had a mini panic before I found a shitty Super 8 in Chinatown with 1 room left. I asked if any of the other girls minded, and they were totally fine with it, as we wouldn't be hanging out at the hotel much anyway. Fast forward to us arriving at the hotel, and it's literally inside an Asian strip mall. It's kind of sketchy, but hey, we rolled with it. We checked in, unpacked, and headed down to the convention centre to set up our supplies. Afterwards, a bunch of other tattooists asked us all out for drinks, so all 6 of us said sure, and we met up at a bar. We had a great night and everyone was having a blast. I was really not used to drinking at all, and it was getting later and later. Being my first convention, I didn't want to be tired the next day, so I asked if anyone else wanted to leave. They were all still partying and didn't want to go, and I didn't want to ruin their time, so I let them know I was heading back to the hotel by myself and called an Uber. When I got there, it was completely empty. I walked through the mall and it was silent and dark. I made it to the hotel entrance and walked past the check-in desk. Just total darkness. There was no one there. I was a bit creeped out and was looking around. I took the elevator to my floor and walked past the communal breakfast area. This is where shit started to happen. The breakfast room was dark, but I could see a silhouette of a man sitting in there alone. When he saw me, he stood up, and I could hear his footsteps walking behind me. I tried to stay calm and say to myself, he's probably just heading to his own room. You're freaking out for no reason just because it's late. But as I continued down the halls trying to find my room, I decided for whatever reason to turn around, which led to the most disgusting sight I've ever seen. The doors for each room dipped in the wall slightly, and as I turned around, I shit you not, the man behind me quickly dipped into one of the doorways, then peered at me from behind the wall. We made direct eye contact, and I swear my heart fell into my stomach. I turned back around and sped up, just wanting to get back to my room and lock the door. I was almost there. I was at a T-intersection of the hallway, and there was a fire extinguisher behind glass in front of me. I could fucking see him behind me again in the reflection. I turned around again and I saw him again dip into someone else's doorway and peek at me. At that point, I absolutely lost it. I started running and booked it the last few meters to my room and around the corner. I swiped my keycard so fast I'm surprised I didn't fumble and drop it. Then I slammed the door shut and locked the door. Thank God I turned a corner, because then he wouldn't have seen which room was mine. I looked through the peephole in the door and watched him pace the hall for a few minutes before walking away. I immediately went to the hotel room phone to try to call security, but no one was answering. So then I called my co-workers who were still at the bar and told them what happened. They came right away and helped me find an employee. I guess they have next to no staff overnight and no security at all. The employee we did find tried to look for the guy, but he was long gone. He told me he checked the cameras, but I never heard if anything came from it. I don't know what would have happened if that guy caught me, but I'm glad I never found out. This story took place when I was a kid. We, my parents, my big brother Jack and me, all lived in a small house in the suburbs. We were difficult kids, I suppose. We would get into fights or skip school quite often, which drove our parents insane. One time I broke Jack's Game Boy and he got so angry he hit me in the head with a baseball bat. He was grounded for over a month and I still have a small scar over my left eyebrow. But despite all that, we were pretty close, my brother and I. Jack would always defend me against bullies and help me with my homework. Our family life wasn't perfect, but we loved each other and that's what counts. When we were about 8 and 12 years old, my brother and I both were plagued by terrible nightmares. We'd often wake up at the same time, drenched in sweat. More often than not, we couldn't remember what was so scary, but when we did, we were terrified to find out how similar our dreams were. The details were different, but they almost always featured some kind of dark entity, like a shadow that was creeping around the house watching us sleep, waiting for something. Sometimes we could even see its face, which wasn't actually a face. It was more like the skull of a deer. Also, in some dreams it had antlers, and that's why we started calling him Mr. Deer. We told our parents about him, but they just shrugged it off and said something like, we'd probably seen the same horror movie. The dreams got more frequent and the creature came closer every time. It got so bad that sometimes I'd start crying before going to bed. Jack would always calm me down though, telling me that he'd protect me and that they were just dreams. One night, however, there was no nightmare and I slept like a baby. I think I even dreamt of something nice this time. I got up feeling relaxed and happy, bearing a little hope that the nightmares had stopped for good. I got dressed and went downstairs for breakfast. As I entered the kitchen, my heart stopped. There at the far end of the table sat Mr. Deer. I couldn't believe my eyes, but there he was, complete with a deer skull face and antlers. His shadowy figure had a blurry outline that was always shifting, like he was made out of black smoke, just like in the dreams. Next to Mr. Deer sat my brother Jack. He was quiet and had tears in his eyes. Across from Jack sat my father, his face contorted into the most forced, tense smile I have ever seen. My mother stood next to the stove, smiling that same terrible smile, with her eyes ripped wide open. "Oh, good morning, Sam," she said in a grotesquely friendly voice. Her voice was shaking. I panicked and wanted to run, but my mother put a hand on my shoulder. Now, don't be rude to our guest. Be a good boy and sit down." I looked at her. Behind that terrible smile, I could see that she was extremely scared, and her eyes were welling up. It looked like she was made to smile like this by some unseen force. I looked at my brother, and he nodded, so I sat down. I looked at Mr. Deer. He just sat there. His breathing was slow, deep, and heavy. It sent shivers through my body. I think I have never been so scared in my whole life. My brother looked at me, and even though he must have been terrified, he tried to put on a tough face. "There you are, Mr. Deer. I hope you like my cooking," my mother said as she put a plate in front of him. I was shocked to see that there on the plate laid our dog Rusty, motionless. I started to cry silently. Mr. Deer lifted Rusty off of the plate and opened his mouth, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. Jack looked away and my mother covered my eyes with her hands. I could hear the terrible sound of cracking bones, flesh being torn and blood spurting. When Mr. Deer was finished with his meal, my mother asked, "Well, did you like it? Was it okay?" Mr. Deer took a deep breath, and with an unnaturally deep voice he said, "I'm not yet satisfied." "What more could you want?" my mother asked. "I want the children," my father said nervously. "Now, wait a minute, that's not what we agreed. You can't just—" Mr. Deer lifted his hand, and all of a sudden Mom and Dad froze. Their movement stopped completely. My dad was half standing up with his mouth still open, like somebody pressed stop on a remote. Mr. Deer rose from his chair and walked over to us, right through the table. Just right through it, like a fucking ghost. My brother and I screamed and we jumped up. We ran for the front door, but it was locked. We wanted to get the key, but Mr. Deer already stood in the hallway, so we chose the only option left and ran up the stairs. We ran up to my room and locked the door. In a panic, I cried and screamed, but my brother held me tight, telling me to calm down. "It's going to be okay, trust me." We could hear Mr. Deer's heavy breathing coming closer. Suddenly there was a loud knock at the door. We were sitting on my bed, holding each other. Then a black smoke-like substance started coming through the keyhole with a hissing sound. It pooled on the floor, building up into a figure. "He's coming! What do we do?" I yelled. My brother reached behind me and opened up the window. In my panic, I didn't even think about that. He looked me in the eyes and said, "When you get down, promise me one thing." "What?" I asked. "Run." With that, he pushed me out of the window. I fell pretty deep and landed in a thorny bush. Jack closed the window behind me. "Jack!" I yelled. Then I heard Jack scream. Then came the same noises from before. Again, gushes of blood, and it painted the inside of the window. "Jack!" I screamed at the top of my lungs. No answer. I didn't want to, but I kept my promise and started running. Out of our yard, down the road, hysterically crying for help. Then suddenly I woke up. It took me a minute, but I realized that it was all just a dream. I sighed deeply with relief. I went downstairs to get some breakfast, and I entered the kitchen hesitantly. There my parents were sitting at the table, just like always, and everything seemed normal. "Mum, Dad, I had a terrible dream again. Where is Jack? I want to tell him too." "Who's Jack?" my dad asked. I looked at my dad in disbelief, but he looked dead serious. "What do you mean? Jack, my brother?" My parents looked at each other confusedly. I thought this was a joke, but my parents both claimed that they did not know who Jack was. I ran up into Jack's room. It was an office room now. All his things were gone. "Jack, where is he?" I yelled. My parents didn't know what I was talking about. I ran around the house frantically searching for something, anything, but no matter how hard I tried, I found nothing at all to prove Jack had ever existed. He didn't show up in any family pictures. The marks on the doorframe that showed his growth next to mine had vanished too. Also, our dog Rusty was nowhere to be found, and his bowl and his basket were gone too. What the hell was going on? My parents got a little worried. They told me that it was probably all just part of the dream, and that I had always been an only child, and that we've never had a dog. I screamed and cried, and I threw one of the worst tantrums ever. I didn't stop for days, so my parents sent me to a child psychologist. He said that it was probably a form of child psychosis, so I was given some psychotherapy and medication. After a while, I realized that Jack was gone, and that there was nothing I could do. I calmed down and eventually stopped talking about him. I never saw Jack, Rusty, or Mr. Deer again. As I grew older, life threw problems at me. I got tired and I started saying to myself that maybe it was all really just a dream. Just a weird false memory that my mind clings to for some reason. But sometimes when I'm alone for too long, I get all fired up again. It all seems so real. I remember how I grew up with Jack, how we played and walked to school together, and how we told each other scary stories at night. And how the hell did I get this scar that I see every morning when I look into the mirror? My parents claim that they don't know where it came from. How do you forget how your child got a scar on his face? Jack, where are you? I miss you. This might be considered something akin to paranormal happenings, more so than it is an eerie, unexplainable occurrence, but I highly doubt it was any of the sort, as the house we lived in at the time had no history of unnatural occurrences or anything that would imply otherwise. Either way, I think it's worth sharing. You can input your thoughts once you're done reading what I've said about this unsettling experience. This happened a couple of years ago, back in our old house. It was an old one-story house. Now within it, the interior is limited to 2 bedrooms, a shared bedroom for my parents, which was right across from the room my siblings and I occupied, the only dividing line being the slim hallway. To the right of the hall from our bedroom door is a dead end, and the only exit point is to your left. Straight ahead from there you can be facing the bathroom, and to your right would be an entryway to the living room. Now on this one particular night, my 2 cousins who'd been sleeping over, my 3 siblings and I, decided we'd play hide and seek. We implemented a rule that limited hiding spots to our bedroom, the bathroom and the living room. Any further than that, and that was considered out of bounds and violating the rules. We all agreed, and at the end it was decided I'd be it. After the countdown, it didn't take too long for me to dig around the bedroom to find one of my cousins, who we'll call Sally, and one of my sisters, let's call her Anna. So I'd found Anna and Sally, and I'd searched the bedroom thoroughly. No one else was hiding there other than them. Now I had to find my other sister, my brother, and my other cousin. I suspected the 2 girls would be hiding in the same place, as they were naturally attached to each other and usually liked to hide together, and the search wouldn't be much longer, seeing as I only had the bathroom and the living room left to investigate. As the bathroom was closest, I opted to search there first. Now here's how I knew they were there. The door to the bathroom is a large, heavy, solid wooden door that is generally a hassle to open, as it makes a loud scraping sound whenever someone attempts to open it after it's been fully closed. I distinctly recall before we had begun the game that the door was slightly agape, but now it was closed. It was either that they'd closed it on purpose to fool me, or they'd shut it behind them upon entering. Either way, I was already set on searching there. Now when I opened the door, the bathroom light was switched off. It's important to note that upon entering the bathroom, you cannot fully swing the door open, as the toilet is obstructing it from the left. Behind the door would be the toilet and a little space in the corner beside the toilet, where one could spy outside into the hallway through the slits in the door latch. I'd failed to notice that my sister and cousin had had their eyes on me, as they'd been hiding in that spot the entire time. When I entered, keep in mind I was oblivious to where the 2 girls were hiding. I was going to switch on the light, but then I noticed someone sitting underneath the bathroom sink. I couldn't see the face, as the hallway light barely illuminated much, other than the view of their knees downwards. To be frank, my siblings and I are all tanned. We're all a natural brown tone, whereas my 2 cousins were both lily white. I automatically assumed that it was my cousin hiding underneath the sink. I'd yet to open the shower curtain to confirm if my sister was also hiding in there, but I was already sure I'd found my cousin. I saw no point in switching on the light if she already knew she'd been caught, but that's the weird thing. She didn't move even though I could clearly see her hiding there. She knew she'd been caught, but she made no attempts to show otherwise. She just sat there with her knees huddled in the dark. I figured she wanted me to point her out, and I found it amusing at the time, at least for that fraction of a moment. I stifled a laugh and entered the bathroom, and I now stood directly beside the sink. All I had to do was bend down to confirm she was there. I still saw her legs from the corner of my eye, and I rolled my eyes. "You can come out now, I can see you." But she didn't, so I bent down suddenly and said, "Found you," only to find there was no one there. I was so confused. I know what I saw. There was someone there, I was sure of it. My sister and my cousin finally spoke up. Apparently after this whole incident, they explained to me they were sure I'd found them already when I'd called out stating, "I can see you." They'd assumed I'd been talking to them, but then they were confused when I didn't look back but instead obliviously continued into the bathroom. So they kept quiet and assumed I was either bluffing or I was messing around with them and would whirl around suddenly and point them out. Instead, they were extremely spooked when I ducked down excitedly to point them out from under the sink, because there was no one. They were the only 2 who had been hiding in there. Now rewind back to when my sister and cousin finally spoke up. "We were right there," my sister's shaky voice spoke. I turned behind me to find my sister and cousin hiding in that small corner space behind the door. We all looked shocked and spooked. The hallway light shone against their faces, illuminating their wide-eyed confusion and terror. I was genuinely horrified and immediately backed away from the sink. My brother was nearby and had heard my sister's shaky voice, so he revealed himself and we explained the details of what had just happened to him, ultimately discontinuing the game. Needless to say, we were all scared and abruptly exited the bathroom. For a while we all dismissed it as being a trick of the light, so as to not feel scared of entering the bathroom alone. But I know what I saw. Later on, my sister and Anna affirmed what I believed I'd seen that day. A year or so after this incident had occurred, we had held another game of hide and seek, and she saw exactly the same thing that I did. Underneath the bathroom sink, a pair of legs, huddled, only the view of the knees downwards were visible. Pale skin, unmoving and unresponsive, when she called them out. But when she bent down to inspect, no one was there. Anyway, it was just so unsettling and eerie. I don't believe it was paranormal. Odd, creepy, disturbing, unexplainable. Well, at least for my siblings and I, definitely. If anyone can conjure up a reasonable explanation as to what my sister and I experienced, I'd love to hear your thoughts. When I was younger, my family and I moved around a lot, and no matter where we went, we always had some kind of experience with the paranormal. One house we lived in messed up me and my entire family. We all experienced so many strange things in the house that we couldn't really explain. I was either 10 or 11 at the time, I think. We had just moved into this house on one of the oldest streets in our town. It was built in 1877, and it just gives off a strange feeling. It was a huge 2-story house that used to be an apartment building at one point in time, and I think my mum said she ended up finding out it was a funeral parlour. I can't be sure though. When we first moved in, I remember having this nightmare of being in the kitchen at the new house and being covered in cockroaches, while my parents acted as if nothing was wrong. The dream for my age really messed me up. I'm going to explain the layout a bit, so bear with me. It'll be helpful in understanding the story. For being an older house, everything on the first floor really flowed. You could stand in the kitchen and see straight into the living room. The downstairs had a private office with its own bathroom and what could be a working kitchenette, a bedroom, main floor bath, kitchen, living and dining. There was also a very long hallway that ran beside the living and dining rooms that started at the front door and ended at the main floor bathroom. We never really used the main floor bathroom as I always felt super creeped out by it. It always made me feel secluded and like if something ever happened, no one would know. The bedroom on the first floor we turned into a playroom for my younger brothers and me. It also was the access point for the maid staircase that led from the playroom to the upstairs laundry to the basement. The hallway also had the door to the basement, which is where my older brother lived. The second floor was made up of 4 bedrooms, laundry and a bathroom. The staircase led to the front door. It also had the attic door at the top of a small landing. My parents' and 2 younger brothers' rooms were at the front of the house, and mine and my sister's were at the back. The hallway was a huge area that led back to my sister's room and the laundry room. My bedroom was connected to my sister's. Her room was actually a giant sun porch with a glass pane door that connected our rooms. We both had our own entrance from the hall though. Now my room had 2 doors that were right next to each other that led to the hallway. I hated it. I always had one blocked off. All of the encounters or experiences happened between mine and my sister's room. Now most of the experiences happened upstairs and in the basement. And not all of these stories are my own, but also my family's. I'm going to focus on the second floor experiences because there are a lot more of them. I'll probably do a second one for the basement. So a few of my experiences started off pretty cliche. I used to always have this creepy feeling when I was alone upstairs, like someone was watching me, or something bad was going to happen. The first weird unexplained thing that happened, we all witnessed. I mentioned earlier that the attic door was at the top of the stairs. Well, my mum hated it. We went up there when we first moved in, and we found some belongings of the previous woman who apparently used to live there. Now, the attic wasn't livable at all. It was filthy, smelled really bad, had bats, and the wallpaper and paint was peeling. But there was a whole lifetime of photos of some ladies and even her birth certificate. There was even a small room up there that had a rocking chair in it. The landlord had no idea whose belongings they were either, and he didn't care to clean it out. My mum didn't like it at all because she got this really unsettling feeling when she would go up there. She made it a rule that we weren't allowed up there, and I didn't take much convincing. Now, the attic door had only a little hook lock on it, and my mum would always keep it locked, but every morning it would be unlocked. We were blamed for doing it, of course, and we weren't necessarily always well-behaved kids, but we swore we'd never unlocked it. It never failed, though, to be unlocked. My mum ended up barricading it after a while. Now, 2 things that I will never forget happening to me happened, I believed, after we started renovating. Cliché, I know. The first thing was when I was upstairs one day playing with my dolls, and I heard someone rattling my door handle. I brushed it off as one of my brothers messing with me. Then I heard it again. I decided to try and catch them this time. Now, it's important to add that the doors were about an inch or so off the ground, high enough for a kitten to squeeze under. So I waited to see a shadow, but there was nothing. I opened the door and there was no one. I definitely would have heard or seen someone leave. I went back to playing, but I was freaked out, so all my attention now was on the doors. That's when the other door handle started to shake, and it echoed against my dresser. I booked it out of my room and ran downstairs. I was terrified, and I spent the rest of my afternoon downstairs. I'd like to mention that I don't remember seeing the handle itself move, only hearing it. The second thing that happened was after we started to remove the paint in the hallway. We found some really creepy old wallpaper underneath it. Keep in mind, after removing the paint and wallpaper, we all started experiencing a ton of things. The bathroom upstairs was one of those really long ones. The sink and toilet were at the very end, and you had to step up to them. Now, it's a little blurry on how she was standing, but at the very end of it, my best friend and I both caught sight of a little girl in a white dress, standing at the end of the bathroom. We both saw it, and it's the only time I've ever seen a spirit. I never thought any of it was true, and always thought that my mind was just messing with me, until my sister told me something this past Thanksgiving. Now, my sister had a lot of experiences. She probably suffered the most, actually. Her experiences started a lot earlier than ours did. My sister used to hear knocking on her hallway door. My older brother admitted doing it at least once, but denies doing it after that. She said she would hear it all the time, and it was consistent. Soon, her door became permanently stuck, so she couldn't use it at all, so I had to use the one that connected our rooms. My sister isn't someone who lies, so I do believe everything she has told me. The second thing that she had happen was one night when she was laying in bed trying to sleep with her back to the outside of the bed. She clearly heard 2 little girls laughing behind her. That's why I believe what I saw in the bathroom was real. She froze in fear and couldn't move. There were a lot more things that happened to her, but I can't quite remember them all, so I don't want to go off my memory alone. I will add, though, that nothing ever happened to us in any of the other rooms upstairs. My mum did hate the master bedroom and slept downstairs for the majority of the time we lived there. We as a family have never been skeptics when it comes to the paranormal, but this house definitely made us 100% believe in it. My childhood home was built over Bull Run battlegrounds. For those who don't know, the Battle of Bull Run was a particularly bloody Civil War battle. Neighbours would sometimes find arrowheads and bullets, etc. in their backyards. One of my classmates even accidentally dug up the bodies of 2 Confederate soldiers on their farm, and people from the Smithsonian came to oversee the digging of them up and preserving them. It made for a real cool field trip, but I digress. I mentioned that because I wonder if that's why my childhood home was so troublesome. It may also have been troublesome because I was a troubled girl with a fractured family that would eventually break apart in a very traumatic fashion. I think I subconsciously knew it was happening, and it actually finalized around puberty. As far as I know, this is a recipe for poltergeist activity. I was relentlessly hounded by horrific sleep paralysis episodes almost every night that I lived in this house, starting at around age 5, until I moved out at 14. I am now 35 and I still have nightmares about this house. Anytime I see it in a dream, I know shit's about to get dark. Anyway, I want to talk about one particular incident. I was 13 and my dad had left us. It was just my mum and I in our now too big house, as my father and older sister had moved out. At night I would do my own personal care routine and then go to bed. My mum would stay downstairs and finish dishes and tidy up. Then she would walk upstairs, walk down the hall, come into my room and I guess tuck me in, like wish me good night and kiss my forehead. Then she would leave the room, turn off the hallway light and go to her room. At which point I would either drift off to sleep or more often than not enter a vortex of hypnagogic hallucinations, which would carry on until I was completely exhausted. One night I was in bed in the halfway place, relaxed but not asleep or even sleepy, but just listening to the comforting sounds of my mum downstairs cleaning up, dishes clinking, the faucet being turned on and off, her gently humming a song. I heard her finish, walk from the kitchen to the stairs, then her footsteps walking up the stairs, creaking. I could then hear her footfalls down the hallway, but instead of coming into my room, she just paused outside the door, and then she turned off the hallway light. Now it was pitch black, but then suddenly I could hear her downstairs again, still singing in the kitchen. I will never forget how the fear shot through me like electricity. I was so awake. I did not believe in God, but I prayed and prayed, and I begged God to keep whatever it was outside of my room, asking, please don't let it come in, and most of all, do not let it kiss me goodnight. I could feel it standing there on the threshold of my room, waiting for permission, but I just prayed fervently to whatever would hear me. Eventually my mum came up for real, turned the hallway light back on, and came in to say goodnight. I will never forget that she asked me about the light and why it was off. I didn't even bother to tell her because I didn't want to scare her, but she did acknowledge it at least. It was real. Something turned off the light. Something wanted to come in and kiss me goodnight. During my time in a mental institution, I'd gotten a room to myself. I was 14 at the time. It was all white with 2 small beds on either side of the room. It was plain, a plain white room with fogged out windows, and it was empty besides the 2 beds, the shelves in the corner, and me. After 2 days of no one to talk to, I decided to try making a friend. Stealing a marker from the art room, I drew something on the wall of my room. It was a black wolf with a skull for a head, and that night I felt less lonely seeing the drawing on the wall. A couple of days passed and I started to talk to him. I had named it Scully. He never spoke, of course, but during the night I would talk to him about the days that I'd had. Day 4 in the mental institution, and the nurses found Scully and proceeded to wash him off the wall. At the time he was my first and only ever friend, so of course I felt depressed about it. Day 5 I started seeing him in the corner of my eye. It scared me at first, but after about 2 hours I got used to him being there. I started talking to him again. He still never answered, but this was normal. One thing happened that day though. One of the older kids, 16 I think, tried to take my food from me. Now in my family no one takes food off someone else's plate. That was the rule. As her hand reached my plate, I growled at her, looking at her from the corner of my eye. She didn't take the hint, so I stabbed her with my plastic fork, making the fork break with the prongs still in her hand. Of course she screamed in pain from this. I remember someone trying to grab, and at the time I had major anxiety when it came to people touching me. I still do really. Panicking, I punched one of them right in the gut and I told them not to touch me, tears streaming down my face. After 9 days I was taken out of the mental institution and was brought back home. I was not allowed to have anything that I could hurt myself or others with, which I hated. I also had to take pills for something. We had to crush them up because I couldn't swallow pills. Weeks flew by. I was sitting in my maths class and that's when I saw him again, Scully. He was sitting down on the floor next to me. It's been 2 years since then, and I see him from time to time. Right now, he is sitting down on the end of my bed. He is still my first friend. However, he is not my only friend now. Red door, yellow door. I have never played the game, but I have experienced smaller incidents that people said that they had had when they played it. When I was young, I was able to see things, and I was very aware that what I was seeing was something paranormal. My mum and grandma had also experienced things, so I thought this was all normal. It was as if I was dreaming, but I knew that I was meditating. I was around 4, and I already knew how to enter the deepest part of my consciousness. The first time it happened to me was in the bathroom whilst I was taking a shower. When I turned around, I could see a tall guy holding a spear in his right hand, and he was wearing all gold armor. He was so tall that I couldn't see his face. I was definitely conscious as I was actually taking a shower. Another time I was having trouble sleeping, so I decided to meditate and go into a deep sleep. I ended up finding myself in a really dark room, but I knew it was big and I could hear people screaming. I then could see a red dot that I followed around. I thought it was leading me out of the room, but then something happened afterwards that I can't remember, but it freaked me out so much that I thought I was going to die, as something was following me. Then I woke up. This next incident is even scarier. One day we'd gone to the beach when I came across this tower. I made my way in, and there were a couple of girls inside. I was chatting with them when suddenly one of the girls told me to hurry and run, as that lady is coming. Totally confused and scared, I started to run. I took a route going up some steps towards the top of the tower when someone grabbed me. It was some lady. Some woman had grabbed me, caught me, and then stabbed me. I woke up after that, and I don't think I was ever the same again. I was always a weird kid in school, and sometimes I was very detached. Teachers would tell my mum that there was something wrong with me, like I was traumatized and that maybe I had some kind of mental disorder or learning disability. I was always inside my head. I don't know how, but I've always felt like I was stuck inside my body, and I couldn't really connect with the outside world after that. This was going on for quite some time until I finally sort of snapped out of it. I don't really remember when, but I think it was after I started going to high school. Freshman year, and things looked good, but then out of nowhere I started smoking and got my paranoid thoughts in my head again. It might sound funny now, but I started smoking weed, and then I began to experience real paranoia again. It got to the point where I had to stop smoking weed because I thought I was becoming schizophrenic. On one occasion I actually went into hypnosis, and I couldn't move my body. It's like as if I was talking to somebody inside my body. There was like a demon in me, but at the same time there was an angel. They were both guiding me, and I kept asking them questions, to which they would then reply with a yes or no. Then it started getting worse because I couldn't tell them apart after a while, which really freaked me out. After that I didn't smoke weed again, but I would start hearing voices in my head, and it wasn't just me experiencing the things my mum was saying. The things that I was hearing, she would hear too. She'd hear it in her sleep, and she'd also seen a little boy and a little girl that I have also seen whilst conscious. I started to go to church, and it helped. After a while I was really fighting back with my demons, and it was getting harder every day, but I somehow did it. The last time I encountered one was when I went to sleep, and I saw my soul leaving my body and travelling across the world into this field with low grass, and I saw a little house with a bunch of graffiti on it, and in the window I saw this really creepy guy looking at me and smiling. Then I got creeped out and traced my soul back into my body and woke myself up from it. The next day my friend was sleeping in my bed, and she felt someone pull at her leg. She left my house and never came back. Finally, I don't remember when this happened, but one time I was in a white room. In it I saw a chair, and when I looked closer there was a man sitting on the chair. I was speaking with him when out of nowhere the room turned black, and it was getting smaller and smaller. I don't remember much after that, but I was really scared because it just didn't feel right. I posted this here to try to see if anyone can enlighten me and help me understand why I'm experiencing these things, and why most people say what they do about the red door, yellow door game. that I have experienced without playing. Hey Fizz and friends, and if anyone is interested in early access to all recordings that you can also download, then click on the Patreon link in the description and subscribe for only $1 a month. I love you all, and remember, keep being creepy.